Hi there, this is Kerry Duke. We have another interview with the two Comma Club award winners for the virtual summit. And today we have Neil Martin. Neil, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me, Carrie. It's good to speak.
I tell you what, I'm looking forward to this conversation. You do some things that very close to my heart because I am in that business that you coach in. Okay, and so I'm very interested in that. So before we get into the conversation, what do you do? How do you do it? And very succinctly. And how did you win your two Comma Club award?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, very quick backstory on me. I was in the IT industry for like the majority of my career, and then in 2014 decided I wanted to go in a different direction. And I stepped away from working in a software company with offices in multiple countries and flying around the world. I mean, it's that kind of lifestyle that a lot of people dream of, the constantly being in airports and all that kind of thing, because they've never done it. If that makes sense.
Right?
Like, it sounds really glamorous until you're in it, and you're in another hotel suite or conference room or whatever, and you might know which hotel you're in, but you might not know which country you're in, if that makes sense. It's like it's another Holiday Inn or it's another Hilton or whatever. And I just got to a point where it's like, I'm done with this. I need to do something different. And I'd done pretty well in what I was doing that enabled me to take a bit of time out. And so I took probably about 6 months where I wasn't 100% sure what I was going to do next. But I'd launched a blog, and it wasn't the first blog I'd had, but it was the first one that had any like real success. And in a year and a half, I had like 1 million organic views on that blog, which is pretty cool. But I hadn't really been doing enough to kind of monetize it because it was just a blog. It was just me telling stories of some stuff that was going on in my life, and in particular with my health. And so I started to do some things to monetize it, and a whole bunch of opportunities came out. I mean, I ended up speaking at events with people like, alongside people like Jamie Oliver, and I ended up writing for the Huffington Post, and I ended up being interviewed by the BBC, and a whole bunch of really cool stuff that led to people going, actually, Neil, how did you do all of that? It's great that you've been telling the story of like how you've lost a bunch of weight and how you've got your health back and whatever, but how did you actually like get everyone to pay attention to it? How did that work? And that led to me I'm trying to think, it's probably about 3 years. Yeah, three and a half years ago now. That led to me starting to coach a few people on kind of internet marketing and storytelling and all of that kind of stuff. And having worked with like one or two individuals, that then led to me running courses and various other things. And it kind of grew from there. And the actual two Comma Club award ties in with, running live events. So it's very much a kind of low ticket offer on the front end to get people to come to a live event. And then it's a progression from there into higher level kind of coaching and mastermind programs and things like that. That's basically where the award came from.
Well, that's an awesome journey. I love the whole. I blogged myself to being noticed.
Yeah.
That has that rags to riches aspect that so many people who like to write they dream of. I'm gonna do this blog and then it's gonna be so good, then people will notice it. But you didn't start off with the intention of being noticed. I think that's the big difference.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was. I had a couple of other like little blogs previously, and some of them had kind of done okay. They got a bit of attention and stuff. But for me, it was much more about like, how do I share what's going on with me so that it can help other people? Because I mean, I dropped 5.5 stone, which I'm just trying to work out what the maths into pounds would be on that. Hang on a second, let me just grab my calculator and just work that out really quickly.
Yeah, so we Americans, we don't know anything about that stone thing.
So that's going to be like, something getting close to like 80 pounds, so somewhere between like 75 and 80 pounds that I dropped in terms of weight. And I went from not being able to walk up a set of stairs to running ultra marathons. And I don't know if you know what an ultra marathon is, but it's technically anything longer than a marathon. And the first one I ever did was 107 miles. So like, I had this huge transformation. And I kind of felt almost like obligated when people, like friends and family, were saying, dude, what are you doing? Like, can you tell me more? It was like, how can I get this louder? So I started just blogging about it, putting it on social media and stuff like that. And that's where it kind of grew from. But What I also then discovered was actually from a financial perspective, people are a lot more interested in how can you help me share my message rather than, hey, your message is cool. It was a shift in there of, how do you help even more people by helping more people share their message, and actually people can see a clearer return on investment on that, so they're like happier to pay for it.
Sure.
And I've had quite a few people who've said to me, hang on a minute, why would you coach like other health people who are potentially like competing with you? And my view is quite simple. Like, I want to see more people healthy. I don't care if you learn from me or if you learn from someone else. If you learn stuff that means that you're healthier and you show up better for your family and everything else, that's what presses my buttons. It's about creating those like that ripple effect. And that's so much more important than anything I could ever do on my own. And I think kind of tying back into the theme of this interview, really, it's very much about learning to tell stories. And the first blog I had that kind of got any real attention, I wasn't telling that many stories on it to begin with. And like some of my wife's friends and some of my friends and stuff were, who were reading it because like I was asking them to. They're like, this is boring, man. And it doesn't sound like you. And like, why would I want to pay any attention to this? Because I want to know what's really going on for you, not something that sounds like you're trying to be a BBC news reporter or a CNN news reporter.
That's funny because that's the exact thought I had in my head. He's probably just reporting the facts.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, no. Tell us how you're feeling. Show us the emotion. Show us the story. And they didn't explain it in terms of show us your emotions, but that's what they were saying, and that's the thing that I kind of ended up working out later. And in reality, if I look back, and I mean, I love that Steve Jobs quote about, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking back. There were actually times in my kind of previous career in the corporate world and stuff like that, where a lot of what I was doing was storytelling. Then I just didn't call it storytelling. It was about like mapping out a customer journey and telling the story of how a customer would progress through something, which in many ways was it was literally like a sales funnel, but in a completely different environment with a story that demonstrated it, but in a completely different environment. And I think what I've really done over the last, 3-4 years thereabouts, maybe a bit longer, is just taken those skills and then put them into a different world, but I've also become a lot more conscious of what it is I do, because especially if you're trying to train other people to kind of raise their game in terms of storytelling and everything else, it makes you look more closely at what you do yourself and like, how do I systematize this and how do I give this as building blocks that someone else can take those same building blocks and use them, rather than like, oh yeah, it's great for you, you're good at this, but like I can't do that. It's like it's the way I like to describe it, particularly in terms of like public speaking. It's kind of like if you watch the world's best chefs, right? They're all following a recipe, but you'll never see them looking at it. But if they're teaching someone else, they write the recipe down. When they teach someone else, they write the recipe down. And that's the difference.
So, okay, you said a lot right there, Neil, a lot. You trained yourself to be a good storyteller because you wanted to get more emotion in your blog post, right? Mm-hmm. And then when you did that, you found a lot more success. Yep. Correct?
Yeah, right. Without doubt.
So when then following your journey here, when you had that success, then people were coming to you less because they wanted to have the same type of health benefits, but they wanted to understand, how did you become the storyteller that you are, and how can I tell my story, even though that wasn't the question they were asking?
Yeah, exactly that. It was like, how do I build a personal brand? How do I get people to know me? How do I get people to pay attention to me? How do I build a presence on social media of engaged people? All that kind of stuff.
Right. And then you look back on your business experience, and you said, look, I really was telling stories back then, even though we didn't call it telling stories. And exactly. And to me, that's the place where I think so many people get stuck. They think that they have to sit down and be Stephen King and create some, fantastic piece of literature when we talk about telling stories. And that's not the case at all. All we have to do, and this is what I want your opinion on, is we have to be able to just put down our own story, our own journey, and then let's put those things inside that story that create emotion.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer that actually, when all is said and done, story is what we all are. As in, the thing we'll be remembered for are the stories about us. So your legacy of your life, my legacy of my life, at some point in the future is a story. And we get to write that story every day in terms of the actions we take, but we also get to tell our own story.
Right. Now, how do you train people to bring that story out? I mean, I mean, look, we're not taking your course right now, but just the simple version.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, I've got a few different ways I kind of storyboard with people and break things down. And, to be honest, to go into it in detail, we couldn't do in an appropriate way in an interview like this. It would just take too long. But a few of the things that I kind of get people to focus on is, depending on the type of story, is it like your own origin story? Is it the story about you that positioned you? If it is, then like what are normally 3 or 4 key moments that actually define everything? Because we don't want to hear like your whole story. Yeah, exactly. We don't want to hear the whole story. We don't want to hear, I mean, for me, I'm in my early 40s, right? I don't want, if you were listening to my story and I'm trying to recount like the whole of the last 43 years, that ain't going to happen. But what I want are 2 key moments, like, typically it's 3 or 4, but what are the key moments I can pull out where if I tell you about them, you go, okay, now I get this guy. Now I get how he got to where he is now. Now I get enough of the backstory where I feel like I understand who I'm listening to. That's the point you need to make. But also it can't look too easy, because like people love the underdog. Nobody loves the person, or certainly not, here in the UK. I imagine the US is similar from my dealings with people in the US. Here in the UK, nobody, and I mean literally nobody, wants to support the person that's had everything easy.
Well, sure, we have that Robin Hood effect. We like that underdog who's fighting, injustice.
Exactly. So as a result, we need to see some of that struggle. We need to see some of those difficulties, some of those problems in the story. We need to see some of the things you got wrong before you got them right, but in a way that's appropriate for the point you're trying to make. And so my number one question always when it comes to telling a story is, okay, what's the point we're trying to make with this story? Why are we telling it? Like, why does the audience need to know this thing? What's it actually about? And if we know why the audience needs to know it, then we can go, okay, now what are the key aspects that actually make that point? And like, what do we need to include? And what can we leave out? Because again, one of the things that so many people do when it comes to telling stories is they make them like way too long. I've had people who are, for example, where I've been coaching them to deliver, say, a 1-hour keynote. And if you let them, they'd spend 20 minutes of that hour on their own story. Well, the audience isn't there to learn about them. They're there to learn something else, right? So it's like, how do you take that story and chop it down to the core elements that build rapport, without actually being like overwhelmed and it being, hang on a minute, this is all about you and your ego, because that just switches people off. And it's finding that balance.
Absolutely. One of my favorite examples of a super short story is Ernest Hemingway. All right. He's known as this prolific writer, written all these books and got to start doing all kinds of short stories. But he was challenged to, create the shortest story he possibly could. And it went like this: for sale, baby shoes, never worn.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the entire story. Exactly. And I think, to your point is that when people start to think about their own stories, is that, yeah, they do get long-winded. They start and, back in 1962, a boy was born.
Yeah.
So yeah, what, right?
And the worst thing is when they start pulling out all the pictures to demonstrate that story too. It's just like, this is me in a diaper and a nappy. This is me when I was at school. This is me in my first ever day at work. It's like, who cares, right? What we care is if you're positioning yourself as like an expert, what qualifies you to help me?
Right.
That's
What were
all I
those
care.
steps?
Yeah, exactly. That's all I care about. What qualifies you to help me? And I, I'm also a big believer in this, that when you're positioning yourself as the person that's qualified to help someone, that's not about you being the hero. That's about you showing them that you're an amazing coach to help them become the hero. If you look at, I mean, I want to use the term football, but I know that means something different on your side of the pond, right? So
Yeah,
I'm going to say
soccer.
soccer. If you look at soccer, some of the best soccer coaches, soccer managers of the teams weren't the best players. They were good players, but they weren't the best players. What they were better at was the strategy and learning, like, how to actually run a team rather than play in the team. And for me, I want someone to demonstrate to me that, like, they're the coach, they're the manager, they're the one that can actually show me what I need to do next and where I need to position myself and other people and all this kind of stuff to make these things happen. It's almost like I want a choreographer, not a dancer. It's like I want someone in there that's going to point me in the right direction, but not want all the glory for everything that I then go and do myself. I want a Yoda, not a Luke Skywalker. I want a Dumbledore, not a Harry Potter. I want someone that's there to give the advice and guidance. And so for me, if I'm positioning myself as a coach, I want to position myself as the one that can give the advice and guidance, not the one that's going to try and hoggle the limelight.
Excellent points. So if we were to look at you, Neil, we would say that you're somewhere between a crusader and an educator.
Yeah, I guess.
Your attractive character, the guy that's in your story, is a crusader out there trying to help people be better. All right. And as part of that, you're also an educator.
Yeah, I mean, for me, actually, a term I like, and this, I've grown up with like a huge love of hip hop and rap music. Okay, and there was an album that came out quite some time ago now by a group called BDP, Boogie Down Productions, that was called Edutainment. And for me, that's what I try to do. It's like educational entertainment. That's really how I would see myself. It's like I want people to have fun when they work with me. I want people to have fun when they come on a course I'm running or whatever. I don't want it to be like pure training and pure education, but I want to make sure that you get something that's worthwhile, that ups your game. That means that you can go and do something you never did before. Does that make sense?
Well, absolutely. I mean, they've done studies that kind of show that if you can inject humor into the story, then that point will be remembered far greater than if you don't use humor. So,
Yep.
Humor is a great cementer of information.
Yeah. I also think if you flip it on its head slightly, one of the examples I give about the importance of story actually is, you may know this already, but I don't know if all of our listeners will, but there's research that shows if you take a fact and you tell a story that includes that fact becomes 22 times more memorable than if you just share the fact on its own.
Oh, absolutely.
And you saying about like humor, the example I very often give on this is, have you ever been to see a stand-up comedian? You go there, you sit in the auditorium and you listen to all these jokes and everything else, and it's a great night and it's all really funny. And when you get home, or like the following morning when you go into the office or something, you want to tell people these jokes, right?
Yes.
How many of the one-liners do you remember?
Not very many.
But if there's been a story, can you often remember the punchline?
Sure.
Now, it doesn't mean you can tell it in the same way. It doesn't mean it's going to be funny when you say it, because there's timing and there's all kinds of other stuff that's going on in that stage performance that you're probably not going to, if you've only seen it once, you're not going to be able to replicate. But you can still remember what the punchline was because of the story. And for me,
we have a running joke in our family about a Dane Cook comedy show from, it must have been from the early 2000s. And, it wasn't just that it wasn't a one-liner. It was a story, and it was a repetitive theme throughout his show. All right. Mm-hmm. So it's like he's telling the story. He has this punchline, and then that punchline kept repeated throughout the show. And it's like, here, 20 years later, I still remember the whole story.
Yep. Because
Yeah, go ahead.
because you can remember the story and that makes you remember the details. And here's the thing, I guarantee the way you remember the story is not 100% how it was, but it doesn't matter. And that's how, again, I think as a species, we've shared ideas and messages for years because, the internet's not a particularly old thing. Wikipedia is not a particularly old thing. Even books and encyclopedias, in reality, the number of people that were able to read them, consume them, afford to buy them is still a relatively new thing. The way we used to share information with our children and stuff prior to all of that is we told them stories.
Yeah, of course, yes. From a marketing standpoint, we're still very much using Aristotle's ethos, pathos, logos. I mean, it's just that's 2,000 years old, and yet it's part of every piece of marketing that we do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we talk about ClickFunnels, you're a ClickFunnels user.
Yep.
And I'm going to, imagine that you're kind of a fan of Russell Brunson, and one of the things that he's really famous for putting out there is that we have to tell stories, and he's trying to help everybody learn how to tell stories, right? I mean, he's got his funnel scripts to help you with copy, and in every single video he's doing, he's telling a story. How many of us don't know his potato gun story, right?
Absolutely.
So with that said, how would you help? How would what would be your best advice for ClickFunnels users on, how to incorporate those stories in their funnels? The biggest issue I personally see is that people think that ClickFunnels in and of itself is some kind of magic bullet, but it's actually the words that go into the funnel that make it what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two or three different things to say on this. I mean, I think first of all, Funnel Scripts is a great tool, does a great job, provided you know what you want to put in the answers to the questions. So, it will guide you to create copy. And I think it does a really good job of guiding you. Now, you might edit it a little bit when it's finished and stuff like that. But as a framework, it delivers frameworks very well. And it's going back to what I was saying earlier about using recipes. It's kind of like it's a deliverer of recipes that you put your own ingredients into. And I think it does a really good job of that. However, the other thing I want to say is the more stories you have, the better. So for me, one of the things that I focus on is like, almost everything that happens in my life, I'm going, is there a story in this? Like, or even on occasion, there's even like I might have something I want to create an offer around. And it's like, what story do I need to make people pay attention to this? Do I need to go do something I haven't even, I've never done before so that I can get the story of that thing to help me position this thing? Because the story is going to pull people in. Every single time it's a story that's going to pull people in. And, I mean, Russell's talked about this as well, but this idea of having like an inventory of stories, it's like, how many stories can you actually come up with that have happened in your life already? And my guess is for the average person, it's a serious number if you think about it properly, because it can be small things that can be applied in completely different ways. And a lot of those will be small things that everyone can relate to. Simple things like going out for food or driving in your car or starting school or whatever. But if you can think about when you actually did it, you can put in enough detail that makes someone engage with it. Whereas if you just try and tell that story in a broad sense, it doesn't hook us, it doesn't pull us in, because we need those little details that show that it's real and that can put us in the same scene that you're in. It's like, we don't want to hear you retell a story, we want to hear you relive it. And that's, for me, that's the biggest thing. It's like, show me a real story that I can see is real, and then you'll hook me in. And if the story's really good, sometimes even if the offer's not great, if the story's really good, you've got me anyway.
I agree 100%. I don't even have anything to add to that. That's I think that's excellent advice. Your point about ClickFunnels or funnel scripts, mm-hmm. that point is exactly why I'm doing this. That you need to be able to put together that information in order to really get the copy out of funnel scripts. Yeah. And so if you can't put that information together and have an understanding of what that story is, funnel scripts is really hard to use.
Well, again, let's break this down a slightly different way. Okay, let's just say you get, the best chef in the world gives you a recipe to make, I don't know, whatever dish, right? It doesn't really matter what the dish is. Let's just say, I don't know, it's like a world famous Italian chef has given you their personal recipe for a lasagna or something like that, right? Depending on where you source the ingredients from and the quality of those ingredients, how good's that lasagna going to be? Because the chef that's world famous for that recipe, if they're using the best quality, like, basil and the best quality pork and the best quality beef, and, they're making all the pasta by hand themselves, and, that is going to be completely different to if you go off to Walmart or Target, or here in the UK, like Tesco or Asda or whatever, and you buy like, the pasta that you boil in water to rehydrate it. And then you buy like, maybe meat in a can, and it's not going to be the same, right? And it's
Agreed.
the same thing. It's like, Funnel Scripts gives you an awesome recipe, but how good are the ingredients you're putting into it, and how much time have you spent thinking about those ingredients? And if you can put more effort into your ingredients, that your ingredients are of a higher quality, then what it gives you on the back end is going to be of a higher quality too.
Agreed. So Neil, where are you publishing? Where can people find your material?
Well, do you know what? It's funny you ask that, because I'm actually in a period of transition with a few things with my businesses and stuff like that. So right now, the best place to find me is probably my personal kind of profile page on Facebook. Either like literally me and as a person, Neil Martin on Facebook, or there is a facebook.com/Neil Martin official, which is, it's not got a particularly big audience on it, but it's got quite an engaged audience on it. That's probably the first place to start. In terms of like some of the broader stuff, like I say, I'm going for a bit of a rebrand and things, and I don't know exactly when people are going to hear this based on when we've recorded it. So I could give you some pointers, but they'd probably be the wrong ones. So I would focus on Facebook right now.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I appreciate your time. I think this is a good place to stop. You have told us some tremendous tips on how to tell a story, and I hope the people who hear this take that advice.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me on.